So, welcome to this episode of Tax People Aren't Boring podcast. We're thrilled to be joined by Dan Gallen from the Association of British Insurers. I've got that right. That was take two, by the way, everybody. Dan is the head of tax. And Andrew's going to start with the most leading question.
Yeah,
first.
So Dan, are tax people boring?
In general, yes. I'm surprised you managed to get a series, to be honest. I thought, probably it's only me, and then, nobody else is worth interviewing.
Well, it's an interesting one.
I am, of course, actually only joking there.
Well, no, you say that. I've spoken to a couple of people, and some people say, yeah, actually, we are quite boring. But, the whole point of this podcast is to say, look, actually, tax is so diverse, it touches so many different areas. You can't be boring to work in, tax because there's so much going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I find is that there's lots of different personalities, but there are common themes that come through. And that is that, generally a lot of tax people have, attention to detail. They tend to be very focused on granular things and making sure they get things right. And, that attention to detail, does, prescribe yourself some tendencies, which are, you tend to concentrate and be able to work through things like spreadsheets, legislation, whatever, in a way that, maybe not everybody can.
Well, that's interesting because that fundamentally doesn't describe Andrew, who also works within the tax industry. I mean, maybe attention to detail on occasion, but concentration?
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
I think as my wife says, she calls me, she says it's squirrel. It's like, oh, shiny thing. Oh, another. And I'm constantly being distracted, but I've got a great team around me to make sure the actual stuff gets done. Yeah. We very much keep you on the straight and narrow.
I mean, so basically, some tax people might be a little bit boring, but it's just those general kind of traits that creates that perception of tax people being boring. Are you a boring person, Dan?
I've got my moments. I have been known to sit at home and do a jigsaw and things like that.
Rock and roll.
But equally, I've also got quite sort of varied history. Had lots of fun at university. Got a family. Go around and do lots of things that that make you look like a bit of an idiot, like going to Alton Towers and spending all your time there spraying people with water on a battle galleon.
I like this. So let's delve into your checkered past because this sounds remarkably fascinating, and I'm sure it's what everybody's tuning in for.
No one cares about actual tax. All we know is the horror stories behind.
Yeah. So how did you get into tax, or what was your journey from sort of young adulthood into where you are today?
So I started off, from school to university, and I was, generally good at sort of numbers and things like that. So I did science. I did chemistry at uni. Enjoyed what I was doing. Did a nice project. Carried on and managed to do a doctorate in the same area. I am actually Dr. Daniel Gallen.
What? Dr. Daniel. Oh my goodness.
I didn't know that.
No. See, this is tax people aren't boring because, especially if you do carry on.
Well, it's definitely Dr. Dan from now on.
Dr. Dan.
Yeah. No. Part of the reason I did it was obviously I was, very interested in the subject area that I was working in, doing cutting edge research, groundbreaking and world leading and all that. But equally, I quite like the student lifestyle as well. Because effectively doing a doctorate was a chance to live the student lifestyle, carry on doing the things that you enjoy doing as a student, playing sports and things like that, living with your friends, in an affordable way, getting all sorts of student discounts and all that sort of stuff. And avoiding having to grow up and get a 9-to-5 job.
Amen.
And avoiding paying tax by the sounds of it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, there was very little tax paid, largely because there was very little money.
It's true. You talked there about playing sports at university. I understand that there's a particular sport that you were quite good at. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I did, do various different things when I was at uni. So, football being one of them, played the odd darts match or whatever. But table football was my big one.
See, I'm contesting that this is actually a sport, and I want to know how it can be and what your definitions of this are.
Okay, so technically it's not a sport at the moment. It is registered on the pathway to become a sport. There are sort of, a British National Association, the British Football Association. There are international associations, the International Table Soccer Federation, and every country's got their own federation. National tournaments, international tournaments. if you go on the website, www.richfoods.com, you will see that the UK website and all the tournaments, with the local venues and then the national events that take place. Usually these are, sort of like somewhere between 5 and 10 tables, they put those in a venue together, do some singles, some doubles, have some, graded events, so, for beginners or for, the sort of the middle tier players, and then open competitions as well.
So I'm already able to see that you do not fit the typical profile of somebody that works in tax. You started off as a doctor in chemistry. You then embarked on a journey towards becoming a table football master. But let's go back to this then. So how did you end up in tax?
So I did the obvious career route when you finish, your doctorate at university, and so I'm sitting there, what do I do next? And I look at the bank balance and I've got nothing left. And so I as I think about what job I want to be doing, I need some money quickly. I went back to a part-time job that I'd had previously just to get some money in, which was Burger King. And I stayed there for, the next few months while I was working on what I wanted to apply, and ended up staying there for another 3.5 years working in Oxford, in the Burger King in Oxford, and just, generally having, a pretty good time, of, enjoying work, enjoying the student lifestyle for another 3 years, seeing friends and living with friends and, and doing things, while also playing a lot of table football, organising a lot of table football, travelling internationally to tournaments, a couple of years, managing to go to lots of UK tournaments, and and generally enjoying life. At some point, I realised I needed to get a career rather than a job, and getting towards late 20s, towards 30, I was like, I still don't know what I want to do. I don't want to grow up. I don't want to do this. But what I think would be helpful would be to have the ACA, the accountancy qualification, behind me.
Yeah.
And so that prompted me into applying to the Big Four for accountancy. I didn't really know the difference between audit and tax at the time, and I ended up applying to audit, which, in hindsight, I think was really, really good, because it gives you that such great training of understanding how business works and going to finance teams and seeing how everything actually fits together. But equally, 3 years in audit was quite enough. And as I reached the end of that, it was looking around what other options are there. I was at KPMG where I did my training, and I really enjoyed working at KPMG. I thought there were very good people there. So I wasn't desperate to leave or anything. So I was looking at the options within KPMG, and the skill set that I picked up in audit, accountancy background and corporate accounts, and moving through to do corporate tax, was a logical step at that point. And that was, the jump initially onto Convent, so relatively risk-free, and then moving permanently through to the corporate tax team. And I was helped with the industry specialism as well. So I've always, done financial services,
Well,
lots of insurance.
You're the second person that's actually told us that they've gone from audit through into tax. So maybe is that a common pathway, would you say, in your experience?
It's not uncommon. I mean, majority of people wouldn't do it. I think the majority of people start in tax and stay in tax.
Right.
But there is definitely, a significant minority who do move as qualified accountants, who've got all the basics and have got, the skill set there to go away and do tax, but haven't spent, the training contracts, and that year's experience. And I found that, although for the first year or so in tax, I felt very much on the back foot, that I was behind my peers, as assistant manager, or whatever. I quite quickly caught up, because a lot of what they've been doing for 2 or 3 years had been doing things like, compliance or, doing administration on jobs and things like that. And it was quite quickly to take the broader skill set of understanding how, firms work and accountancy works and, double entry and things like that, and apply it to, the tax things that we're looking at.
So this has put you in good stead at this point. So you're happy earning a crust at KPMG. What happens next?
I stayed there for quite a long time. I initially joined in 2007 and I stayed through to 2019. I had some health problems in 2018. So I got my way up to director by that point. So, doing very well, potentially, starting to think about, future partnership or something like that at some point in the future. But just as I come up to 40, I actually had a heart attack, which was a bit of a shock. I think that's probably more of a shock to my wife, who was 8 months pregnant at the time.
Wow.
So that was a bit of a shock for her.
Well, I can understand why you had the heart attack now with a pregnant wife, 8 months gone. I think a lot of us have experienced that.
Yeah. So that was a bit of a shock and a bit of a always of let's step back. And KPMG were very good at the time. They restructured what I was doing. And gave me time off of for a couple of months and reduced work and all that sort of stuff. But I started looking around for something that was going to have a little bit more balance in the tax advisory profession. And one of the roles that was being advertised when I was doing this was at the ABI my first time around. And so I joined the Association of British Insurers as a policy advisor, stayed here for a couple of years and really enjoyed it. But at the end of sort of like my time now, I was ready to step back and do something a little bit more demanding and push myself a little bit more. And one of the things was that to go back into advisory at Deloitte. And I've spent the last couple of years at Deloitte before recently rejoining the ABI back in January. So
wow. So on that topic then, Dan, Dr. Dan, and I think you see this with a lot of sort of tax professionals. They move from, say, Big Four or Big Six, etc., into business, then back into big, and they alternate. What's the and you've said there, there's a difference, potentially more challenging. What is the main difference between working, in-house for tax as opposed to working for a consultancy?
I think I'm in a bit of a unique role here because it's working for a trade body. So what I don't have to do is I don't have to look after the ABI's tax affairs. I don't have to do any of the quarterly reporting or monthly management accounts, anything like that. That's actually all picked up by our in-house finance team. Now, if they do need any help, anything specific, obviously, we will, wander across the office and help out. But it's just not part of the job. My job is very much around influencing and making sure that the industry views are being represented to the relevant stakeholders, and then also to act as a liaison between government and other stakeholders and industry, so that we can pass on messages to be able to gauge how things would land if things were introduced, or to be able to help articulate very quickly that if something changed, what this would mean for the industry. So sometimes there's legislation going through Parliament or about to be regulations about to be laid. There's a question as to if we made this change, would this be okay or not? And that they need a very quick answer. They'll tend to come to a.
So that's interesting. You talk about sort of working with the government, and I think quite often, in my experience, the burden of any changes that government put in place are on the taxpayer to have to conform. So, what's your sort of impression of working with the government? Their actual understanding of any legislation or things that they put in place and how they impact ultimately the taxpayer.
Yeah, or do they just mandate from on high without any understanding of how it affects real people, real businesses?
What's their real true understanding of how tax works?
Yeah, and again, it's very mixed. I think the general theme that I would say is that they keep on layering on compliance burden. There's only one direction of travel, which is they adding in extra reporting requirements. And it's very rarely that something gets taken out, and it's every budget, every fiscal event, there's additional measures being brought in. So in the corporate world, the last 10 years we've had SAO, C by C, country by country, POTAS, promotion of tax avoidance schemes, DOTAS, declaration of tax avoidance schemes or something like that. Then we've got corporate criminal offence. We've got lots and lots of acronyms that come up. And they don't sound like that difficult, but each time you bring something in, those taxpayers have to go away and work out: are we affected? What does this mean for us? How do we have to comply? What do we need to do to demonstrate compliance? How do we evidence that we've complied with it? How do we have the right processes to manage our risk? And when you get something like the corporate criminal offence of facilitating tax evasion, there's an unlimited fine, and your only defence is that you've had reasonable procedures in place. to
it's
detect.
important.
And it's difficult to be able to say, what are reasonable. So if you're a good taxpayer, a good corporate taxpayer, and you've got, good risk management procedures in place, you're going to do a lot of work around that. If you're much more of a, fly-by-night operator who doesn't care, you're probably going to do nothing at all. And I think that's one of the themes that I've seen across the legislation coming in is there's lots of regulatory burden that ends up impacting upon the good taxpayer, and whereas it's actually targeted at the bad taxpayer. And I think that's a general theme that tends to come through.
Interesting.
Yeah. Would you because that's something when we're I mean, my background obviously, as you know, is the indirect tax side of things, where you have to cover the whole lot. But we set up tax solutions, and we try and work with our clients. So it's not just about capturing the tax, right? You have to get your master data correct. You have to make sure that all of the the VAT numbers have been captured, for example, that the contracts, the freight Incoterms, everything that ultimately feeds into the tax. And part of the problem is that people don't necessarily put that focus around doing things in the right way. And a lot of what I say to our clients as well is, if you have the right structure and the right process, and you're abiding by those as best as you can, if something then happens within your data that you couldn't have foreseen, that then potentially causes a problem that could mean that you're non-compliant, the fact that you put all of these things in place surely is going to help you. And you've in effect just sort of confirmed that. It's actually, if you're caught and you've got nothing to show that you're actually trying to do things in the right way, ultimately I suppose they could throw the book at you. Whereas if you've been caught and it's a sort of a genuine mistake because you have all of those processes, then hopefully that should get you. Make
I
sure
like to call this best foot forwardism, which I'm coining as a new phrase. Put your best foot forward by having all of these things in place. I am going to take it back a step because, the podcast is about people. We're talking about industry development, which is obviously of interest to people. But I think one of the things that you've said that I think is going to be interesting to people that are either listening or watching is when you talked about your journey and the struggles that you had, with your health and, at a time when, everything was very difficult. There will be people that listen or watch that may be going through something similar, or for whom life is happening, and you get to that point where you need to pick yourself up and get back on track. What advice could you give, or what did you learn from your experiences about getting back on the saddle, so to speak?
So there were a couple of things. One is that, coming back to work after having had a heart attack, I actually did find that I was very emotionally volatile. So it was very easy just to suddenly feel like things like, overpowering, or that, that somebody said something or sent an email and you read it and you're like, oh my God, they've said it. Oh, like you're throwing yourself off. And actually, half an hour later and a cup of tea later, you read it again and it's like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, I think many people can relate.
Yeah, so, I recommend tea. I think that's the coping mechanism. But yeah, it's, the thing with me that I found was it just took a little bit of time, and it passed, pretty, over the next, 3 or 4 months, things, gradually calmed down, and definitely stepping back from the firing line of being in an advisory business to working, where you're forever being faced with very tight deadlines, and client commitments, or, audit deadlines, or whatever else that you need to sign off things on, transactions and so on, to something that was, a bit more predictable, a bit more, longer time frame, a bit more big picture, in terms of deadlines. That, was definitely the right thing to do for me at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting.
I think,
go on.
I think the other thing that particularly helped me was that I had made sure that I had some sort of, health insurance and so on, at the time. So, obviously KPMG were very good with the sick pay policy that I had. So, but there were, things that were in place, like the group income protection policy that would have been available if I needed to take more time off work,
sure,
and things like that. So there was that peace of mind of knowing it, and I'd always paid the top up amount on top of that, because you could top it up to make sure you got a bit more. I'd always pay that little bit extra on terms of insurance, just to make sure that, that we would be able to, pay the mortgage and do whatever else that we needed to do. So, that was, that gave peace of mind.
And I think probably for tax people, if I was going to categorise every taxpayer or somebody that works with tax in some fashion, are that there is a degree of prudence, generally speaking. So, I mean, that kind of foresight kind of translates almost directly to what you and Andrew were saying a minute ago about making sure that you put best foot forward with stuff like that. But if you weren't a tax person and you had nothing to do with tax and you had nothing to do with chemistry, what would you be doing?
Yeah, or actually, how far did you get with your table football, for example, right? Because we touched on that earlier, and I know that is a passion of yours. Did you, is that something that you could have actually created a career out of at all?
So, in answer to your question of, could I have made a living out of table football? There's very few people in the world who do it, and I wasn't anywhere near their level. They were, a complete level above me. I got to the level of being, a very good UK player, slightly below the very best UK players. Wow. But I did, reach, things like, I managed to reach finals of events, when I was playing, on my best game. And, there were, national ranking tournaments, I've come second, in one of those, which is, a pretty high level.
Do you know, Dan, you are fascinating to me, because when we first spoke before we had, like a few weeks ago, you were this self-deprecating individual that, don't ask me, I don't know, all of that. And since this call, we found out that you're a doctor in chemistry, that you were one of the best British table football players, and that you've had a really remarkable career to date, and you're now head of tax at the Association of British Insurers. I don't think that self-deprecation was warranted. Yeah,
and also with the table football as well. Is it just a case of just being able to spin those players as fast as you can? That's pretty much all I used to do, just spin them. I'm judging by the look of your face, that's probably not the right thing to be doing.
Yeah, there's a whole rule book of things that I think, but they can probably be summed up as number one being don't spin. There's a very clear rule that you're not allowed to keep spinning the bars. Now, in actual fact, it's just not very effective. So, although it's in the rules, you probably wouldn't need it at the top level because, it's too random. And as in any sport, it comes down to, being able to repeat things again and again to, with precision, so be it, something like darts or snooker or something like that, it's about control and repeatability, rather than, basically what is random if you're spinning something around very fast.
I was going to say, it's very much in line with, a good indirect tax solution is being able to repeat the same processes continuously, consistently, and then,
with focus, not scattergun, not like flailing your arms about.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite interesting when you've got the top players playing each other in, particularly in the doubles matches. It tends to go down to very much a set piece thing of, the ball gets passed up to the attacker's bar onto the middleman, and then they do their best shot, which is, there's a couple of different, shots that are like the highest percentage shots that people tend to have. They will have trained to one of them. That shot can probably go maybe in 4 or 5 different holes across the goal. And the defender's got, a goalkeeper and 2 defender bar, on the bar. And they've got to try and somehow cover 5 gaps with, 2 or 3 men covering, moving in and out. So they can't cover all the gaps. And it comes down to both a physical thing of speed and who's going to do what, but then also a mental thing of how fast can you influence the other person as a defender to shoot where you want them to shoot.
So there's so involved. I had no idea.
It's almost like when I'm defending, I quite often will open a hole, knowing that I've got my plan to close it as they're going to be shooting because they think they've just
don't give away your strategy on this podcast, whatever you do.
No, but I think what Dan also is
half the players, then the other half just shot straight and just scored. So it had a upside and downside. With my
no, I think, like you say, that's that sort of same lesson in life, right? And in most things we do, and I think pushing this back. I know it is a tax podcast, but pushing this back to tax. I think too many tax departments, they're always just struggling to do get those reports out, and so the things that they have to do, but the things that they should be doing, they're not necessarily put the time or the effort in place. So it's like a bit of a catch-22, because if they actually sorted out, for example, the master data, they made sure the processes were being done, there are monitoring tools to make sure that those processes are being followed in the right way, then that means the quality of the data and the ability and the time it takes to actually do that sort of final reporting then becomes so much easier and faster. And I think most companies are so far behind in even from that tax point of view of being able to get those processes in place. And I think it is a case, the tax departments, they have to balance. They have to say, right, we've got no budget in a lot of the time, and we've only got a small team. Where do I put these people? What do I prioritize on? Because I know what we have to do, but I've only got a certain amount of resources to be able to, meet these deadlines.
Well, I mean, and also finance departments as a whole tend to be, run on a bit of a shoestring unless they're doing a big, transformation, finance replacement, and so on. And the tax teams tend to be, the poor cousins of the people who've got no money. So the tax team tends to be the one where things are even more manual. Excel is king. Excel is always king in tax. And because you can do something on Excel, it doesn't mean that you should be doing it. But you need to be able to step back and articulate why you need to be doing that. And I think what quite often gets lost in this is that it's just pulling tax up to the same standard of controls as the rest of finance. Because, quite often there is, a higher standard in the finance team in terms of, eliminating spreadsheets and, and things like that than is maybe done in the tax world. And so making the case for investment in tax systems to support and tax, solutions is quite often harder or seems harder than maybe it is for finance teams.
Actually, I think that's an interesting one. I suppose a bit sad really, but my sort of end goal, my career would actually be able to set up like an ISO standard, from a tax audit, system audit point of view, so that companies are...
Actually, that was my idea. I brought that to the table. I'm not kidding, Dan. Like, I literally brought up this idea when I first joined Innovate Tax.
And bearing in mind, I had this idea before he joined us. So
he actually said, "Oh, that's a good idea."
What are you on about, dude? Anyway, so that's something that I've always been wanting to do. Is that ultimate is to say, okay, certain companies have to meet these requirements, just like we have with audit. We don't have anything like that yet. Most of the features around audit are actually linked to making sure that the financial statements and the transactions are done in a way so that tax is paid correctly, right? So why don't we have that sort of legislation?
Why is that perception? Like, why are tax people the poor relations in the finance team, and what can be done to change that?
It's a difficult question to answer. If it was an easy answer, I think it wouldn't be an issue. It's partly legacy, and just this is the way it's always been, So if there's never been a need to do something, why go away and spend money on it? I think there's also that bit of that insularity in that tax people tend to stay in their silo. That business partnering role of tax specialists is really important, and working with business, working with finance, working with others, and it's something that more can always be done on it. I think getting out there, getting the message out there of why tax is important, and and some things resonate with the wider business. Financial exposures, clearly that's one area where that resonates. And articulating risk from that perspective. But I think also what we're seeing is a change in terms of the reputational risk and things like that. In terms of the other risks that can apply. So if you're making mistakes that impact customers, and so as an insurer, you're dealing with lots of policyholder taxes or whatever, there's a massive reputational risk there. If you're a big, FTSE 100 group, publicly listed, and you're potentially going to be, hit by fines from HMRC, under national minimum wage legislation, that's, a shocker from a public relations
corporate
perspective.
reputational damage is very much like, and tax is very much perceived that way. Like if you're seeing the merest whiff of a perception that there's an evasion or a non-compliance that was known about or anything like that, then reputation is dragged over the coals. But yeah, there's lots of things.
I think a lot of governments are changing. They become more digital, like the tax authorities. I think you mentioned earlier about more and more reporting, right? And that's why it's so important to get your data right. You know, it's all about creating that digital link from entering a transaction to being able to, and reporting it and being able to prove what that journey is. And I think the governments now are, a lot of them I don't think actually understand or know what to do with the data that they're bringing up. And we've always done a lot of presentations around the importance of data, and we have this concept of data zombies, right? Where people upload all this data, they think it's gone into a data graveyard, but all of a tax authority just has to create a new algorithm, and they can go back all of your historical data, and then these data zombies can rise from the dead. And I think maybe because of this, revolution in the way that the governments are capturing more and more data, they're now being able to see more, and that is then allowing them to identify areas where they can actually then target or, to change the legislation to, as you say,
Orwellian, really, isn't it? If you think about it, bit Big Brother-esque, where you can be monitored at any time.
Yeah, because I think previously, I mean, I remember being on a project once, and they said that they had an audit came in, and one of the questions asked was, for this Ferrari that was bought, this was, there was an exemption on the tax, and it was for a bank, and it turned out that I think the person was actually disabled, and therefore they had a special exemption. But for that tax authority to know very specific, that it was almost, they said, yeah, someone had to have whistleblown or had to have told the authorities about that, because there's no way they'd have known about that data otherwise. Whereas now, because of all this digital data that we're capturing, it is a case of you're finding the needles in the haystack with big data. And so the whole there's a big shift where I think companies could go along just doing their processes, and then now and then submit their VAT return or their tax return and saying, right, everything's done, great. Whereas now that's not the end of it,
Yeah, so it sounds like it's the death of that fly-by-night attitude you were talking about earlier on, where that's not really going to be an option anymore. You have to be compliant by default.
I think what you're saying about the authorities hoovering up data, and I mean they are taking time to work out what to do with it. So we've had iXBRL tagging of financial statements, and tax dumps for the last 15 years or something like that. And I think we're only just starting to see the tax authorities starting to make use of those. It will come more because they're getting more data and they're getting better at it. But HMRC are struggling to work out how to deal with this.
Yeah.
And I think it will be quite a long process before they actually use it as efficiently as they probably should be using it, because their processes just aren't set up to deal with this, and to partly is just to think about what the right questions to ask are, because again you've got inspectors who are busy running around cracking through their tax returns and inquiries and so on, and having that ability to step back of what should we be looking at, how what data would it make sense for this industry to look at, so financial services obviously being different to other industries, and it's something that we will see changes coming through over time. And you've got so many different sorts of forms. You've got accounts, tax returns, country by country reporting data. When we get Pillar 2 returns shortly and things like that, it's just more and more data and making sense of it. And we've got transfer pricing documentation, reams and reams and reams of transfer pricing documentation that's being asked for. It's going to take a long time before HMRC really get their head around, and other tax authorities get their head around what they should be doing with it.
Well, variety is the spice of life. It'll keep everybody on their toes and keep the profession moving along. Well, everybody adapts.
And I think that's why people like yourself are needed, right? Because there's so many different elements of the business. As you say, whether it's the legislation, whether it's the way you do your processes, what parts of the business does it impact? You need to have someone that can actually understand the legislation from a tax point of view, and also the business, to then see how does that sort of fit together.
Yeah.
And I
a lot of the work we do at the ABI is working with our members to articulate the policy aim of what the government's trying to do is this. Actually, the way our systems are set up is like this, and the way our business is set up is like this. And if you asked us for this information, we can provide it very easily. But you've actually asked us for this information, and that'll be really hard. Can we instead give you this, and does it meet your objectives? And trying to make that argument, because if you do things that you need something on a country basis, like country by country report. It was a big shift to like go away and like spend a lot of money to get information in the right format that was required because nobody ever needed a country level set of view of things before.
Actually, it's an interesting point because I think what is potentially required and how it's asked for can be completely different or can have different sort of impacts. And I know, one of the big problems with sort of, I suppose, VAT returns or GST VAT returns and reporting is that you have your financial data, which is a GL date, GL, currency, GL calendar, but then, which could be a 445 calendar, for example, whereas you have your VAT, which is a VAT currency, a VAT date, VAT calendar, right? So when you do your VAT returns, really you should be reporting based on that, the VAT information. So if you have a company set up and you have a US dollar ledger, but you have to report in, Singapore dollars, it becomes difficult. But then you have a situation where a lot of countries have introduced the SAFT type reporting, which is actually based off your GL. So it takes your GL data, which matches it to your transactional data and then to your tax data. So you've now got a completely different report that is pulling your GL based data, even though the VAT returns that it's meant to synchronize with are actually from your VAT data. So it doesn't actually really work. Same as Intrastat and your European sales listing reports. They're never going to fully tie up because they're both based on different periods and different types of processes.
So Andrew's preaching now. He's preaching, and whilst we love it, we are going to have to sort of come to a close on this because tax people aren't boring, and I want to ask some stupid questions. That's what got me on.
Right.
this.
So the first question that I have, because it's nearly lunchtime. I'm not sure where you are listening to this, but it is lunchtime. So Burger King or McDonald's?
I go with Burger King. Loyal to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
Right, because having worked there, obviously, I eat a lot of food, actually pretty happy with all the hygiene standards, pretty happy with the quality of the meat, pretty happy with the taste of all the burgers.
If you buy one now, does it take you back to those days when you were working with them?
Oh, absolutely. It's like, my standard would be a Whopper with cheese. The second I bite into one, it's taken me back like, 20 years to, when I have one, a couple of times a week at work or whatever, part of the break.
But Dan, have you tried right now? So this is controversial, and I do understand what I'm about to say might not, land well with everybody, and I apologise in advance. My favourite burger is the McDonald's McPlant burger, which tastes more like a beef burger than a beef burger. Have you tried one?
I don't think I have.
Right, put it on the top of your list, your bucket list, please. It's absolutely incredible, and I will not hear a word against the McPlant. What about you? I bet he goes for a Royale
food,
or something.
I'll eat it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, he's not picky at all. Right, next question. How many chickens would it take to kill an elephant? And this is subjective.
Well, not necessarily kill, incapacitate maybe is the right word to use.
Are we talking about just pecking, or are we allowed to smother so the elephant can't breathe?
Chickens, so whatever those chickens do.
Because I reckon you could probably shove about 10 chickens into an elephant's mouth, block the nose with a couple more, then it wouldn't be able to breathe.
See, that's not how I envision it. I always say, with that question, I think, how many chickens would it take to mob an elephant?
And Dan wants to get involved with that. So it's
this is
Dan's actually getting involved with shoving chickens where. Yeah, that's an interesting take on this one.
I'm going to ask other people that question, see what they say. Go on, you ask one.
Right. What are you currently watching or reading at the moment? Are you binging on any series?
The only thing I ever get time to watch is the football.
And you're clearly a Sunderland supporter, judging by the outfit you have on at the moment.
Sorry, is that the time?
Just for those people that don't have the not seen the video, it's very much a Newcastle fan. Is our Dan?
Yeah, so I still let you know I'm very much a fan from the team, and it's just a lot more positive than it was a couple of years ago in terms of actually trying to win matches rather than just surviving the Premier League.
Yeah, well, they're doing good. They're doing good.
Oh, do you know what? As somebody who is completely, and you might not know this to look at me, non-sports focused whatsoever, I'm going to ask you one final question, if I may. Toilet paper, over or under? Let's see if he interprets this question the same way that you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm going with like, is it on the front of it or is it at the back of the title?
Thank you. That is not what Andrew thought that question meant, and I won't explain because you can probably imagine. But yeah, no, over or under.
I don't really care as long as it's there. The biggest issue is when there's neither. I think
Yeah.
The diplomatic answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, so on that one then, when there has been neither, what have you reached for?
Oh God! Right, no, don't answer that, Dan. You don't have to answer that. We're not putting our guests under this kind of ridiculous pressure. I think at that point it's probably good to leave it there.
Thank you, Dan.
So thank you
great.
very much for joining us on this episode. Dan's already plugged the football league, but if you can give it again if you want the website to the table football.
Britfools, BRITFOOS.com.
Yeah, and no spinning. Spinning is not good.
Spinning. Right. Thank you, Dan.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.
Cool.